Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, especially during such a difficult time for our community. We have the honor and pleasure of having Jennifer Gray Thompson here with us today. She founded After the Fire USA, which helps megafire impacted communities all over the United States recover. So she's managed to assemble a panel of experts as well to join us. We got so many great and interesting questions, so we'll be able to hear from them as well. Jennifer, welcome, and we'd love for you to introduce the panel today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And just so that you know, After the Fire was founded during the October 2017 megafires in the North Bay of San Francisco. We were the first ones out the gate, and we really didn't have other people to turn to figure out how to navigate this really complicated, very emotional, often process. So we ended up paying our lessons forward in the Camp Fire and the Woolsey Fire. And ever since 2017, we have been in virtually every megafire across the United States, most recently Maui. First, we want to say that we're really sorry for your loss. We would love to be out of business. That would be great if this never happened again. And but in the meantime, what we do is that we bring people who are fire survivors, subject matter experts, who really look at the community in front of us to try to figure out how to best serve. If you've been in a megafire, you've been in one megafire. It's why we're called After the Fire, not After the Fires. We're very sensitive to that fact. And when I assemble people to bring to a community at different times, I really try to think about what the needs of the community are right at that time. And so this is how I chose this panel today. And thank you so much for hosting us and having us. So the first person I would like to come on and introduce themselves is Valerie Brown, somebody I've been working with for years. She can introduce herself and give her bio. She's a technical expert in so many aspects of recovery.
Thank you. So as Jennifer said, I've been Valerie Brown. I've been doing wildfire recovery since my community burned when we called them 100-year fires. In 2007, in San Diego, we had a very large fire. I was running long-term recovery, and so I've been in that space ever since, working with the nonprofits to help the community members and the community at large recover and get back to whatever that new normal is going to be. I also, as Jennifer said, have a fair bit of technical knowledge in that long-term recovery and insurance issues, FEMA, some of the government programs, a lot of that space. So happy to be here with you today. So sorry that we're here under these circumstances.
Valerie is also the vice chair of the California VOAD. And do you want to give what that acronym means?
Yes. So Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. There is a national organization. There are lots of nonprofits that make that up. Each state has its own chapter, so to speak, and each county does that. And full disclosure, I'm also a VOAD chair in the county of San Diego, where I do this work for my local community to help.
Right now, Valerie is in the DRC, and so if she's a little bit wonky on her internet, and that is why, and we appreciate her taking the time. Thank you. And so the next person I'd like to introduce you to is Mike Renner. Mike and I have been in all of the same fires, and he runs a very unique service for the rebuilding process, which is around expediting permits, and knows an awful lot about trauma-informed care during a very difficult time in the practical parts. Mike, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you. Mike Renner. I'm one of the directors of a company, Four Leaf Incorporated. Been around since '99, and starting in 2017, we became the unfortunate experts in expediting the permit process for megafires. As Jennifer mentioned, we've worked in Sonoma County, the town of Paradise, which was totally decimated, Santa Cruz County, Jackson County, Oregon, Malibu, Calaveras County, and most recently Maui County. So we basically come in and augment all of the community development services. So we could expedite permits in a way that oftentimes municipalities have difficulty in doing so. So we can turn permits around generally in 7 to 10 business days, and that's what we do. And I would like to echo what Jennifer said. I don't love this vertical, and I would love if we were no longer in this business.
Amen to that. Thank you so much. And then Jen Kausch, who is somebody that I met in the Marshall Fire in Colorado in 2021, 2022, because that was December 30th. And she's a veteran and she is often on the road with me. So Jen, can you come on and introduce yourself?
Thanks. I want to say before the fire in Boulder, Colorado area, I didn't know anything about fires, and now I'm sitting here on this panel. So for everybody that's going through this right now, it's going to be such a huge learning curve, and you're going to have a whole new vocabulary, and it's a lot. So here in Colorado, we lost a little over 1,000 homes, and it was in multiple municipalities. So in the town that I live in, when I came home after the evacuation, one side of my street was gone and had been lost to the fires, and the other side was still there. My home was on that side. And initially I thought, I'm so relieved that it's there. And I'm also feeling so guilty that my neighbors, their homes are gone. And started to get to work pretty quickly on helping other people and figuring out what the needs were, for my neighbors and then my community. Taking very little time to pay attention that I had also a lot of work to do in my smoke damaged home, because it's not apparent initially that there are layers of problems, and so it's 2 lanes of trauma, 2 kinds of recovery, and I think especially in LA right now, people are much more aware of that concept. So I went from community organizing to starting a nonprofit with a group of other residents that wanted to help. And we did a lot of pushing up towards public officials on, permitting and streamlining things and making any barriers that were there for people rebuilding to go out of the way. And then I eventually ran for office and went to the dark side and thought I could help a lot more on the policy side of things in carrying our recovery through. And joined after the fire and Jennifer in Washington, D.C. and lobbying for fire survivors, and have also gone to Maui to work with them in their fire recovery. So I'm grateful and just wholeheartedly here to help.
Thanks, Jen. And also had the pleasure of meeting Raina Pomeroy in the Marshall Fire. And a big reason why I wanted her on here, she is also a total loss survivor, but she's really a genius at building a digital community for fire survivors that was searchable, archived. It's really a beautiful skill to have in the middle of this. And so welcome, Raina. Please introduce yourself.
Sure thing. Thanks for that introduction. And I'm so sorry for everyone who's watching this. I've been in this seat, so I'm just right there with you. I'm Raina Pomeroy, Southern California native. I grew up in San Marino, now live in Colorado. Like Jennifer said, I'm a total loss survivor from the Marshall Fire, and my family was able to build back our home. We got back about a year ago and celebrated our first Christmas. It's long and it's grueling, and I'm really grateful to be home. And I'm saying this not because, I'm trying to show you what's possible necessarily, but Jennifer brought a delegation to our fire right after, about like 3 weeks after our fire. And I remember just hearing the folks who did get home and their stories and how much hope it filled me with. So I just want to share that in case it's helpful. I evacuated from the 150-mile-an-hour winds and threats of embers, just like your fires. And, I was a mom of a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old at the time, and they're resilient and awesome, and they're, doing so well now, but it was a tough couple of years. And I think my claim to fame here with after the fire and why I keep coming back is because we created a very valuable virtual community. As people were very displaced after the fire, it was really important for us to stay together, to stay organized, to get questions answered. And we've done a lot of that work. We've brought people together. We have stayed connected virtually and in person. And I think that our fire recovery has gone a lot more smoothly than some other locations possibly because of this fact. Obviously, a lot of other folks' work has come into play here too, but collective organization is important when you need to organize and then to advocate for your needs as a community. So as Jennifer mentioned, I launched a Megafire response community, collecting fire survivors from LA, but also from other fires as well to help with any question answering, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Raina. So Evan, if you're comfortable, we can just start with the questions.
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, I'd love to just jump in. I think one of the things that would be really helpful to hear is a little bit just what can we expect in the coming days, weeks, months, years? Like, can you just sort of help outline for us kind of what's next?
We sure can do that. I will say this, that really sometimes when people say it's a marathon, it's really a marathon of sprints, which means that you have to rest in between. And that's a really important part of it. The other thing is that everything we're going to talk about here, it's okay to come back and ask other questions, because it is much like if you had a baby the week before and I showed up the week after to tell you about the next 18 to 25 years. So what you're going to retain is certainly going to change. So what I'd like to do is actually, I'm going to go over to Valerie, if she can, and talk a little bit about the 3 stages of debris removal, because that's a really important process. And one of the things that we really want to talk about is the patience required in the initial part of it, because I know that people want to go back and see what happened to their home, if it's standing, smoke damage, not standing, just to see what's left. But, unfortunately, in megafires, we almost always have fatalities. And you don't want to be in that area while they're looking for fatalities or while they are recovering them. So that does take some patience and some grace. And then there are different stages of it. So, Valerie, if you can go ahead and take that question.
Yes. So, right now, no one should be going on those sites, period, because it's an active site. The state of California has declared every burned area it's a hazard zone, so no one's going in until they do testing. Their phase 1 will be, as Jennifer said, they're looking for fatalities. They're making sure it's safe. All of those homes have live utility wires. If there's anything there's water gushing out from mains. It's a hazardous site. You should not be there. Once they finish phase 1, they typically will, and this will depend on the jurisdictions, they'll allow people to come in and go to the sites and, do that sifting and just, get there and look, but they're typically not going to let you on your site until that happens. And they'll escort you in. Generally, they'll let you know when you can come in. And then the other piece will be when we move into that, they're looking at that debris removal program. That takes, if they're going to do a coordinated debris removal program, which I assume they will, it's going to look very, you'll see a right of entry form on the county and the city's website. They'll share information. They'll do workshops. There'll be a lot of information about that. And that's where the debris can be cleaned up. I do want to add one thing, Jen, about insurance here. If you have insurance, a coordinated debris removal program is where the jurisdiction locally, the state and the federal government, FEMA, are looking at doing cost sharing to make that happen. So if you have insurance, they may ask you up to your policy limit. They're not going to ask you for that in advance. They're going to bill you several years later, quite honestly. You just hold those funds in reserve. If you need to spend it, you just document what else you spent it on for debris removal. And your jurisdiction will go through that process. But it'll take a while for that to come in. That first phase 1 to clean up is usually about 6 weeks in most disasters. It just takes a while to get to that safe space because there are a lot of homes impacted and they're going to have to go literally checking each one of those.
Thank you, Valerie. And I would like to add that for those of you who did not lose your home, we are going to give some very technical advice, but for the entire community, it's important to recognize that everyone is in trauma. Everyone has had some kind of loss here, but there are different degrees of it. And most people don't feel entitled to their own grief around how they feel, because at first fire survivors will say, nobody in my family died if they didn't lose anybody. And then they'll say, but they lost their home. And then everybody who didn't lose their home, they don't feel entitled to their grief either, even though they don't even recognize the streets that they live on. And they too have witnessed the most unimaginable thing possible. So there are many, it changes constantly. And again, to use that parenting analogy, that like the first 6 weeks of parenting are not like the next 4 months, which are not like the next 2 years. And to be sort of flexible and open to the fact that it is a steep learning curve, but we're always going to have people there who can show up to help you and answer your questions. Regardless of whether or not you lost your home, it's still good to understand the process, because a lot of people who didn't lose their home will look back in about a year and a half, and they're like, why isn't everything rebuilt? And so they don't necessarily understand the process. We do expect that this will be cleaned up in probably record time due to the Biden executive order for the first 180 days, that there's a huge incentive there for the local jurisdictions to go very quickly. The Marshall Plan and some of the things that Newsom is doing right now are very helpful. Suspension of the CEQA and the California Coastal Act will be very helpful for Pacific Coast Highway. Getting those things done. But what we also see is people will be in a big hurry to get home. And one of the things that we want to caution them on is we want that for them. But for the insurance market, how they get home to what type of home is really going to determine the future of Los Angeles and what is actually insurable. And in that case, it has to be, this is the biggest group project most of you will have ever engaged upon. It's nobody's doing this alone. There's no leader that's a savior whatsoever. And it's really important to always be building and holding on to community as you go. So thank you.
Jennifer, one of the things that really stood out to me when we first spoke was the importance of securing, long enough term housing that folks aren't moving a lot. We've had a lot of our folks move into short-term housing. They're thinking about when can I get back into my home, or, thinking about the rebuild process. Like when folks are looking at, housing solutions, how should they approach that? And one of the things that we found is just the rental market here has gone totally crazy. So if you have any advice or thoughts on, sort of the length of time folks should expect to be in that sort of temporary housing and how to approach it, would be really helpful.
Well, I can tell you for sure that they should be looking at a couple of years. It's rare for people to get in. It does happen, within the first year and a half to have one thing or two neighborhoods, maybe two houses rebuilt by that time. But first, what I'm going to do is say it also depends. Like if you have smoke damage, like Jen can address, that changes the trajectory too, in a way that's often unexpected. But next time, I'm actually going to give this over to Mike really so that he can address what he's witnessed in communities. And it really does depend upon the community. But most rebuilding I've seen has taken place between year 2 and year 4. Go ahead.
Thanks, Valerie. So I would say the most recent example out in Lahaina and Maui, we currently have about 60 homes under construction, about 260 in the permitting phase. It's been quicker there than I've seen in the past. Generally, the full scope of rebuild, it's very dependent. And what's going on in Southern California right now is so vastly different. You have the Malibu area versus the Altadena area. In some cases, those are folks maybe third home, whereas other areas, that's their primary residence. So the scope and speed is really dependent on what the individual can do. Are you liquid enough to go ahead and start the rebuild prior to your insurance payout? Are the insurance adjusters going to come out from Tulsa, Oklahoma and say you can rebuild for $120 a square foot and have that whole argument? So it's a terrible answer to a good question, but it's very individually dependent.
And it can also depend upon the leadership of your public leadership in your community and how they can facilitate. One of the biggest indicators we see is whether or not people come back is how they build community, which you're going to just hear this over and over and over again, because the more that you can share your pain, your suffering, but also your ideas, your needs, and your wants, with your community, and then filter those back up to your elected officials, and then they can then filter information back down to you, then you also hold social political power at that time as well. And it really does advance the period of time to rebuild. And also there's a lot of mental health benefits associated with that. We have many neighborhoods like Coffee Park, which was 1,500 homes, which they didn't even know each other before. And now they are like spending Christmas together. I like to say they're spooning in the streets. Like they are so close and so tight. And that is one of the major indicators of how people will come back. But again, it does depend. One of the things we're concerned about in this fire in particular is there's so many custom homes. And when you have that many custom homes, it really changes about how the subs can move through that construction zone. It's what we do. I recognize that this may not be a great answer, but the more that they can band together with their neighbors to do some bulk rebuilds or some, share a developer, the faster it definitely goes. You can have different types of homes from the same developer. There just isn't a huge amount of variety in that answer. So that's over the next several years. Raina, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I know going back to Evan's question about rental housing, one thing that was really important to my family, and it might be different for each person and circumstance and where they need to get to, et cetera. But Boulder, Colorado, we had literally no housing at that time. Jen's a real estate agent, so she could probably speak to that a little bit more, but it was really tough. And my family's biggest priority was we do not want to move during this time. And we wanted to make sure that we could keep our kids as close to their school as possible. And that was the decision that we made for our family. And I know, my board member, Tanya, she moved 5 times during the 2 years that she was rebuilding. And that was a choice that she and her family made, but that put a toll on them too. And so, you have to kind of balance out what's the most important factor of, is it the closeness to a certain location? Is it how long you can stay there? I think there's a couple other things to think about. And, every sort of market is a little bit different in terms of rental. So I have heard a lot of creative stories about how people have found rental situations, and those creative solutions sometimes can give you a little bit of longer lead time, or not lead time, but just longer time to be able to stay.
Okay. Jen, did you want to add to that?
I would say some of the people that I've been speaking with that are in smoke damage homes and total loss, I think they have a misinformation or they just know information about what are the rules as far as finding a place and how does that look and when you should do it. And I think there's a lot of constraints that are imagined or made up that people tend to put on themselves in these situations. And so I think it's super important for them to just have a relationship with their insurance, that they've talked to somebody there, that they understand what the parameters are for finding a place. And I'm a big advocate of, sometimes you're not going to get the answer you want from your insurance company, and you're going to have to be a little more aggressive than you're comfortable with in advocating for yourself right now, because they're going to give you the response that is typically the lowest cost for them. And really what I have seen, and myself included, the more advocacy I'm willing to do, which is, it's so frustrating because everybody has just been leveled, and to ask them to fight for themselves right now is the worst time. But there are going to be people in the communities that rise up and they actually get energy from this. And so finding those people that are the ones to do that are really helpful. But as far as the housing goes, we saw a lot of people around the schools, what was going to be the commute for kids. And because, people were really flexible with remote working, and I think there was a little more flexibility there, whereas a big priority was just get kids back in a normal schedule at school. Some of the folks I've been talking to, schools were lost. They're we don't even know what that's going to look like yet. And so I think that is a true impediment to making decisions right now for some families, because they don't know where they're going to actually end up being. And I don't know what that looks like yet, but we are, watching and aware that this is a real decision point that people don't have enough information to make.
Can we spend a little more time? I really want to talk about smoke damage and partially damaged homes, because I think that is something that has quite wide-reaching impact in this situation. But before we go there, do you mind just sharing a little bit about the insurance process? I've been talking to folks who have they've maybe filed a claim, but they haven't heard from an adjuster. What is that? And Valerie just mentioned it's sort of a series of negotiations, but can you just talk to folks a little bit about kind of what to expect in terms of that process?
Absolutely. Valerie, please take that.
Yeah. So in the state of California, you do have, as an insurance consumer, certain rights. I'll put that in the chat to share with people. But basically, you've got, depending on your policy, you're going to have different types of coverage. So for a homeowner, you may have dwelling coverage, you're going to have contents, loss of use or additional living expenses, building code upgrades, landscaping, other things like that, right? That biggest bucket of money is your dwelling coverage, and that's typically what you're worried about first, as far as, do I have enough to rebuild? But going back to where you started, finding that housing, looking at your additional living expenses is probably the place everybody should start first. Give yourself that stable base to go from. So you're going to look at your additional living expense coverage. It's either going to be a time limit or a dollar limit. If it's a time limit, the state gives you additional extensions. Your policy is going to say you have 1 year. It's a disaster in the state of California. You have 2 years plus 2 6-month extensions. So bear that in mind. If you have a dollar amount, there is no extension. It is just a dollar amount. So you're going to have to be very strategic in finding something that meets your needs and you can afford. So that one first. Then you're looking at that dwelling. Do you have enough to rebuild? And the reality is, that's why I put in the chat that it's a series of negotiations. As Jen said, they're going to come back with their scope of loss or their amount. Says, we say it's going to cost this much for you to rebuild. That's their first estimate. You're going to come back with your contractor or professional scope of loss. Says, well, my information says this.
I think you're going to have to repeat that, Valerie. Sorry.
I'm killing the video. Sorry. Is it audio better now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Just the last
so for the dwelling piece. So once they provide you their offer of what they think it's going to cost to rebuild, you are going to take that and look at that and see, is that feasible? Am I at policy limits? And you might have to have a professional scope of loss. You may be working with a builder. Mike does this all day, every day. So he knows a lot of that piece. And Mike, let me just finish on the contents piece before you jump in that. One of the important things to know in the state of California is that they are required to offer you an advance on your contents coverage. It's going to sound really weird because the percentage is based on your dwelling coverage, but it is out of your contents bucket. It is not taking any dollars from that. It's to replace your personal property, furniture, things like that you have. Taking that does not obligate you to anything. They are just giving you an advance. It doesn't mean you've settled or anything like that.
And before Mike weighs in, can you expand on the negotiation part of that quickly?
Yes. So in all of these things, and actually talking about the time, you said that people have filed the claim, haven't heard back. They are bringing in lots of adjusters from out of state. Insurance companies don't necessarily have that full staff on deck. So they bring in independent adjusters to help with this. They have an obligation at the state level in that insurance bill of rights that say they must respond within a certain number of days. They also have to provide you a complete copy of your policy so you know what you're entitled to. I would just keep calling back, document everything you do, whether you're smoke damage or not. Just keep a claims journal that says, I spoke to, I reached out here, you told me this on this meeting, this date. Even if they're picking up the phone and calling you, follow back up with an email and make a note of what was promised to you so that you have that paper trail in case you do need either professional help or you're restarting with another adjuster. And then, Jen, as far as the negotiations go, unless it's specified in your policy language, like that legal contract, it is a negotiation. That's part of their claims handling procedure. You can ask for what meets your needs. It doesn't need to reflect what their preference is. And you'll find that's going to hit on multiple things. When you're doing your contents inventory, they may take your Waterford bowl and try to substitute that with a Pyrex bowl. Well, they owe you that $300 bowl, not that $10 bowl. And so that's that kind of politely persistent negotiating for what you feel you are owed and what it's going to cost to make you as whole as possible.
And there is a nonprofit called United Policyholders that this is what they do, and they're at the DRCs right now. So we highly recommend them. They've been in all of the fires as well, and they're very experienced. And Valerie was the deputy director until recently. She's now embedded with us. So we highly recommend them as a resource. Mike Renner, please go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to add very quickly, going back to Evan, your question based on talking about smoke damage or partially damaged, that everything Valerie was talking about, I know we're focusing on rebuild and using that term, but everything she said is totally analogous to the partial loss or the smoke damage, just to be clear.
So
That's really so. Go ahead.
No, I'd love to spend a little time on the partial damage and smoke damage because, I'm helping both my parents sort of navigate this. My dad had a total loss. My mom has smoke damage and, was a few houses away from just total destruction. And it's actually been much more complicated trying to figure out how to help my mom, and so I'd love to just spend a little time on the partial damage and smoke damage and also your thoughts on how to safely re-enter the home, what to touch or not touch based on how to handle it with insurance, how loss of use works with insurance. But it'd be great because I think there's a huge number of folks who are struggling with the sort of loss of use or partial damage situation.
Jen Couch, you are up. You lived experience.
I think my biggest thing that I want people to know is get an industrial hygienist to look at the property before you do anything else there. Don't clean it, don't touch it, don't change anything, and get that report. The insurance company, I'll give you my experience. They came in, the adjuster came, I didn't know any of this. The adjuster came in, they said, great, well, we need a remediation company to come clean up your house. And I thought, oh, this is perfect, great. They're not fighting me. They're sending the people to come clean. And what I learned after 3 weeks in a hotel and a remediation company, and then moving my family back into the home, we all got sick and couldn't figure out what was going on. Went to the doctor, and the doctor was like, maybe you want to test some more. My daughter has asthma, and so it's like her asthma medication wasn't working, and I was like, something was wrong. And so I called the insurance, and they said they wouldn't send. They were like, the work's been done, it's already been cleaned, and the contractor pointed in their contract that they're required to wipe things down. They weren't required to detoxify or really clean it in a way that was to get the any toxins or heavy metals out. And so I went to the media and did a story. And the next thing you know, my insurance was sending the industrial hygienist to get the report. And the report showed heavy metals, ash, char, soot, toxins, and all kinds of stuff after, a month and a half of this. So even if you're paying out of pocket, even if the insurance company, like just the industrial hygienist report is the baseline for the damage from the smoke. And you have to have that in order to have a recovery plan. And if you don't have it, then you're just going on visuals, and that we know that that's not enough. And so I really want people to know that, because insurance company, the remediation was $30,000, $35,000. What ended up being $170,000 recovery. And so the insurance will gladly send in remediation and avoid the $100,000+ that it's actually going to cost to clean your house properly. I mean, we had to take out carpets, we had to get rid of everything that was porous, seal the walls. It's like a full remodel. It's like, imagine flipping a house that's destroyed. You're gutting the whole thing, and that's the proper way to clean up. And I do want to say there's a spectrum. It depends on the wind. It depends on how much smoke was being carried in towards, and it depends on the house itself and how it was sealed and how it's built. And so the only way to know is the industrial hygienist report. That's my biggest piece of advice.
And with this industrial, I've never even heard the term industrial hygienist before, so thank you for that. But is that someone you get through the insurance company, or typically?
Ideally, they will provide somebody, and they'll send a third-party person to come and do it. It'll typically be somebody local. And in this case, the scale, there's going to be people coming in from outside of the area, I'm sure. But if they won't, you can just Google industrial hygienist and find one in your area and have them come out and do their process, where they test for, they test walls and floors and areas for toxins.
Mike has raised his hand.
Thanks, Jennifer. I just wanted to add, and just for the group, and I don't mean to sound crass in any way, your insurance company is not your advocate in any way. They're looking to save as much money as they can on these payouts. So just be aware of that when you're in any talks, or you're having the insurance company give you a figure. It's never bad to double check. I've been through this, as Jennifer has, enough times to know that State Farm is not on your side.
Raina, is State Farm not on your side either?
State Farm is not on our community side. At Marshall Together, our community, when we built it, one of the main things that really blew up our community and brought people together was the sort of collective knowledge of how each individual insurance company was treating different people. And it was really incredible to see people say like, okay, my policy says this, but this is what they're giving me. And this doesn't match up with somebody else's experience. And I think that when you come together, if you're fighting it alone, it's going to feel really hard. And when you fight it together, or at least you have knowledge of other people's experiences, you can fight more effectively. And, I felt this at the very beginning of our recovery, like, who's going to come to save us? You are going to save you. And I think it's really ridiculous because you're so exhausted and mentally and physically, and you are the person that's going to advocate the most for you. And I think you'll hear this from all of us that, that this is grueling. And I want our communities to become whole again. So I think one of the other things I wanted to say about smoke damage, our house is the last one on our block to burn. So my next door neighbor did not lose her home and it is in a standing home. She did not get home for almost a year and a half. And so while people are like, oh my gosh, my house is saved, it doesn't actually feel like that when the work starts. And so I just want to emotionally caution folks, and you might get home really quickly and that might be your experience. But I think for my next door neighbor, it was a huge surprise. And, $200,000 later, they were home.
Just as a side note, one of the really cool things that Raina did with the Slack that they had is because it was only fire survivors invited, no press, no politicians, was that they were able to archive subjects so that people could go in and find them when they were ready. That's a really big deal in disasters, is that not everybody is ready at the same time, but to go in and just be able to search it and find it, it was just a huge, really a genius idea, and so helpful. Jen, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I wanted to comment. Raina reminded me that, we moved into a residence inn, an extended living kind of place, thinking we would just be there for a few weeks. And that turned into a couple months, and then that turned into 6 months before we actually were able to go back home. And I think I did a lot to try to minimize the cost. And sometimes I think our family paid the price for that, because I didn't really fully understand that it would help us in our mental state to be comfortable and not be stressed. And I would caution people to, if there is something that will make you more comfortable through this and will give you a better peace of mind and let you rest better, like, not a hotel room, maybe a 2-bedroom place, take it. That's what it's there for. And anything that's going to help you, because you don't know how long it's going to take. I thought it would be a few weeks. And then, 6 months later, we were finally moving back, because contractors never seem to finish when they're supposed to. And, things just happen. And so if you think it's going to be a little while, plan for a long while and make decisions on longer than you think you're going to need.
Can we spend some time talking about sort of the environmental impacts? I'd love to touch on, you mentioned porous materials and how to think about caring for those, or clothes maybe that are in a home that, has suffered smoke damage or something like that. But then also more broadly, the community is very concerned, for example, about air quality or other toxins that have been released, and how to think about, how to know when it's safe, or, is it only dangerous in the fire area, or is it more dangerous, in areas that are further away? So it'd be great to spend some time, very helpful to spend some time, really understanding the environmental impacts at a personal level, but then in terms of the community as well.
For reference, we knew the smoke was bad, but we'd never seen this before, and we were not as careful as we should have been in 2017. We did not get the same advice. We were told that we could go home if after being blanketed with toxic smoke for 24 days, that we could go home and eat the vegetables out of our garden. And that is a very bad idea. So that we got very bad advice. We were much better 7 years later. One of the things they did in Lahaina, and that's a really good model to look at, is they put air quality sensors more than they have in any other fire all around the burn zone, all around. It also helped when they were doing debris removal. They did a different process so that they could make sure that the ash was actually not infiltrating the air again. But the toxic piece of it is it's real. It's a concern for sure. I would not bring, I'm seeing on the news, like people bringing their kids. It's fine to bring your kids, but protect them with PPE. A lot of that will be made available when you go to actually sift through your home. Samaritan's Purse is a nonprofit. They'll be there. They're very good. The only thing that sometimes people don't like is they do proselytize a little bit, and people are not thrilled by that. Some find it comforting, some don't, but they will have full PPE. We've also worked with Amazon and Good 360 through the last year and a fire chief to ensure that we actually pre-positioned all of the sifters, boots, everything you need that's non-porous. I have special boots that I wear to every fire that I can hose off after, nothing with shoelaces, that sort of thing. So we have pre-positioned a lot of those items 2 hours away from you last year, not knowing that this would happen. So the environmental concerns are real. Everyone should treat, this is not fireplace ash. It's like touching, it's like oily ash because it's every chemical that was in your home, in your cars, in the businesses. Every single one of those is now combined into this 3 inches of oily ash. So it's a very, very big concern. Mike, did you want to add to that? I felt like you did.
I can add a bit. So California has 35 separate air quality boards. So I would recommend folks contact your air quality board. But I wanted to add on to what Jennifer said. The scrubbers and the activities that went on in Lahaina were vastly different than even from 2017 to 2024. We've learned so much. When we did the debris removal here in 2017, it was, I'm sure there'll be long-term effects. I'm no doctor, but it wasn't great. So I would again say, I would echo what Raina and Jen and Jennifer would say, be your own advocate. Common sense goes a long way in these situations. If, I wouldn't eat a vegetable out of that garden. I wouldn't put a shirt on that had a bunch of smoke damage. It's not just smoke from the fire, like Jennifer's saying. It's all those super toxic chemicals that are going into everything we touch. So
they also told us that we could swim in our pools. I happen to have a pool. That'd be, even though it was October, I wasn't going to at that time anyway, but that pool water absolutely needs to be changed and mitigated. So we were given bad advice with good intentions. LA can absolutely ask for the same treatment that they got in Lahaina as far as air quality monitoring is concerned. It's a very big deal.
What about personal items that are in a home that have been heavily, that's been heavily smoke damaged, porous items? Are those all things that have to go? Is it case by case? How do you know if it's safe to wear a shirt or use a carpet? I mean, how's that determined?
Jen?
Yeah, there are photos of our street where everyone's couch, mattress, chairs, carpet just lining the streets. And they did a coordinated pickup of all these large items, because anything that is porous that can't be cleaned, like carpet, you can't clean the pads underneath. Your couch, like you could clean the surface, but things soak in, your mattresses. And so all of that will have to be replaced. And things like, I'm thinking of like my daughter's stuffed animals, and we have a massive Squishmallows collection that we were very concerned about. And so, that stuff got sent to professional cleaners, and that was all, if you're insured, that was covered by the cost of the insurance. It was a line item, a very large line item on that, to have clothes properly cleaned, soft items that are small that can be cleaned. Books were a big topic for our community in terms of, how do you can't clean a book page, and so that became one of those where there's going to be things that are like A to B, we know what to do. And there's other things that are really going to be a personal choice for the family or whoever owns it to decide, how well can I clean this and what risk am I willing to take in terms of the toxicity of this item? How was it in the bookshelf? How was it, was it exposed to air very much? So there's like a lot of, like Mike said, the common sense part of it is just to think about what contact was made with the items in your home and what can be cleaned and what can't. Yeah, for the most part, a lot of things can be cleaned, and they should be, and your insurance will cover those. But the big items, I think one of the things that we really struggled with was communities that this is an affluent community, and we saw people coming and taking these things that we had put out and taking them to use. It was like brand new couches and beds and things. And it was unavoidable. Like, I don't know how to fix that or stop that, but it was hard to watch because we knew that they were taking things that were toxic, and despite putting signs and things on them. So like, there's going to be some after effects of things that happen. But for your people, just anything porous has been affected at some level.
One other thing that our community used was the strips. Jen, did you use the strips too? Maybe you can talk about a little bit about that.
I didn't, but a lot of people did. I can't remember what they were called, but you can just buy them like in bulk that you can swipe, kind of test. And so if you had items like the books that you wanted to just see what was really on those without it being part of a broader industrial hygienist process, you could do that. And so that's something that came much later, I think, when people were really starting to figure out what I'm keeping and what I'm getting rid of.
Yeah, for those special items that felt really important.
There's some sort of swab or strip or something.
Yeah, it's sort of like a science kit kind of a situation where you swab it and then dip it in a chemical, and it tells you like what heavy metals or what like
VOCs or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Val. Yeah.
Yes, that's it.
If you want us to find out what it is and shoot that over to you, we can certainly do that.
Thank you. I want to make sure we have time for the teams. Sorry, go ahead, Valerie.
Just one thing. If you're working with your insurance company on remediation, bear in mind they are only going to allow you to pay for testing once. So in your contract with your company that's doing remediation, have that say pre and post testing so that you know they've cleaned it up. Jen, this is something we learned the hard way after the Marshall fire.
Very interesting. In the contract, ask for pre and post testing.
Yes, because you're submitting that contract for reimbursement, and that way you're not dealing with your insurance company to come back and say, well, I need to pay for post testing after the cleanup.
So smart. Really helpful advice. Well, that's a great segue actually to a question the team had. I want to make sure we have time for the team's questions here. There's a big question around like, what are common mistakes people make after these sorts of megafire disasters, and how should we avoid them?
Oh, you're never more susceptible to fraud than when you're in trauma. So a couple of things for mortgages, you can find out through Fannie Mae. And I think we've shared some of this with your team already. We can certainly reshare it. You need to find out who owns their mortgage. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mae own about $11 trillion or 50% of the mortgages in this country. They have a policy that you can defer your mortgage for a year by adding it on to the very end of your term. And that kind of gives people, and there's no balloon payment and no interest accrues. That gives people breathing space. That's one thing that we really highly recommend, is any way that you can get some breathing room so you don't have so much financial pressure. The other thing that we see a lot is people will try to hire a contractor by not following the state law of how much they can give, which is 10% or $1,000, not more. And any contractor that will take your $100, $150, $250,000 against the law will also do that with other people. So we've had so many unfortunate circumstances where people have given huge amounts of money to contractors who then oversubscribed themselves and gone under. Sometimes they are arrested and prosecuted, but it doesn't mean that people are getting their homes back. So that's a very, very big deal. Another thing is that when you are applying for FEMA relief or SBA, HUD, any of that, you will often get a denial letter right away. We actually have it on our social media. There's been a lot of that in your fires. That's not real, that denial. That's a request for more information. And you have no limit on the number of times that you can actually come back and appeal. Appeals are normal. They're trying to guard against fraud because fraud is rampant in disaster. 3 types of people show up. Those who want to sell you something, those who want to help you, and those who want to defraud you. And navigating between those is very difficult. If anyone shows up telling you they know everything, they are a savior, they're a hero, they are the ones who can save you, those are not your friends. There's no one person who has all of the answers for this process. It's why I depend on all of these other people to walk in with me, because they do have experience, knowledge. So I highly recommend. That's a huge point of vulnerability. That also goes back to price gouging. Interestingly, I have a friend who works in the White House, and she was posting yesterday about, fraud, price gouging for the rental market in particular here. And we knew that was going to happen because it happens in every single fire we've ever seen, even though the law says you can't do it more than 10%. It's like there's a very big limit on what you can and can't do. But previously, I spent 3 days catching this huge flagrant violator here who was evicting old ladies to triple or quadruple the rents on he had many units here in town. And I got all the evidence for what it was rented before, how long it's been rented, and it went from $1,500 to $10,000 overnight. Sent it all off to the DA. And they're like, oh, this is a big deal. We're going to indict him. And then nothing happened. Very common. And so it's worth it for a lot of people to break the law. So interestingly, so I explained all that to her. So today I'm watching the briefing at 8 a.m. and all they want to talk about is they are going to prosecute price gouging. I assume that that's true. I just think that's something to keep the pressure on, because they're giving the people the opportunity to walk back all of their price gouging. Now, that is not the same as bidding wars between consumers when they are trying to purchase a house. If you have the ability to go and purchase a house and you have the funding and all of that, then that's often a good idea while you're also rebuilding. It depends on the circumstance. Mike, I felt like you wanted to answer that question too.
I would say that one of the most important things to remember that I just wanted to reiterate, when you sign a contract with any contractor, they can only get $1,000 or 10% of the total contract, whatever is lesser. And we saw people fail time and time again on that, where people paid $100,000 up front, and that contractor took that money, bought a lumber package for another client, and overextended themselves to the point where someone's left holding the bag. And that $100,000 in many, many cases here in Sonoma, and what I'm starting to see in Lahaina, makes the difference on if someone can rebuild or not, so to speak. I just want to reiterate that. Thank you, Jen.
Oh, it's a very big deal. It's one of the number one things that we see. Right now, there is a huge scam going on. I got a call from a reporter where I've never seen this before, but there are on LinkedIn, there are a lot of Nigerian people it's a comment on Nigerians, just happens to be coming from that country, offering to set up and manage fire survivors' GoFundMe accounts. And on GoFundMe, we think they did a good job in Maui, pretty much, because they actually knew each other. It was small enough to contain it and confirm that the money was really going there. That may not be possible here unless you know the person directly or you have confirmation that that's who they are. We really caution people on the GoFundMe. It's because it can often be a scam.
I wanted to add just two quick administrative things. Everything in writing that you can get in writing, even if and it doesn't have to be combative, it can be very cordial, but just whatever I was told on the phone, I would confirm an email in writing. And someone suggested this, I didn't do this, and it would have been so much better if I had, but to set up a new email address for fire stuff. just everything is there, and that you never have to go search for receipts or communications or pictures, because later on down the road, when there are opportunities to apply for funds or things that you're, when money and resources become available to help people, they're going to have to provide information on what they've spent money on, what they've received, what they've applied for. And it was just, in a trauma brain, it's chaos to try to find those things. And they were, on my work computer, on my home computer, on my phone. And so just, if that is just, it's super helpful to just set up an email address for the fire recovery itself.
I do know that Raina wants to talk, but I don't know if you have a hard stop at 2:00, Evan. And so
I can keep going if you all can. I want to be conscious of your time.
I'm fine. I just wanted to make sure that we were being respectful of your time. Raina, what did you want to add?
Well, Jen told you all about my email ID. No, I'm just kidding. The email is critical. Like, truly, it will save your inbox and mental health in so many ways. Also with a bank account, if you're able to do that, because there's going to be large checks that come your way, and having that in a spot is helpful. One thing that I don't know if we've talked about today is Firebrain. Firebrain is real. It is a fog. It is a funk. It is I can't remember anything. And, if you are not directly fire impacted, but feel this, that's real too. I think that this is a really tough moment. And I think just like remembering that as a collective is really helpful. And it might last for a little while. For me, it lasted a good year, probably. One quick thing that I wish that I had done, so I said a little bit about our organizing in our community. One thing that I wish we had done earlier was getting connected with our nonprofits as an organization, because the amount of work, and also I guess electeds too, like organizing quicker with those folks would have eliminated a lot of the heartache that we had in multiple parts of the process. We had our our debris removal blocked due to a lawsuit, and we needed to organize and get that unblocked. And so, every sort of roadblock is a month, 2 months of a delay for folks getting home. And so anytime you organize, I keep saying this, but it really truly is, like, if you can organize and you have the wherewithal to, even if it's just your neighborhood, your street, and getting those folks together, it can be really valuable. And if you're interested in joining community, there is virtual community out there. I'm building one. I know there's several others, and there's a lot of opportunity to connect with folks.
I will say that one of the things we did in Sonoma County, which was a game changer, is we instituted block captains. So one person would say, I'm going to take responsibility for 10 to 100 homes. I will communicate with them. I'm going to be in a weekly meeting that was actually hosted by our county supervisor. It can be any elected. It should be supported, though. And what it allowed them to do was to meet weekly at like 7:30 in the morning for at least a year. And it made it easier, because then the onus was on the interest groups to come to the fire survivors instead of trying to get their attention one by one by one. And it also sort of solidified their political and social power. And it made it really easy for the media to continue to tell the story. Storytellers are really important in this entire process. It also meant that they were able to communicate around how to bring their costs down, how to do so many things. And we ended up changing the law for the people who came after us, because we only had 1 year of ALE. And there were several things. Also, it helps you with legislative items. For example, we changed the law, then we gave that to Oregon, then they changed the law. We gave it to Colorado, and they improved on the process. It's all about improving as you go. And a big thing that came up in Colorado, which we were not aware of, and since you raised your hand, Jen, I'm actually going to let you talk about that, is the banks holding on to more money than they were owed and then not conveying the interest to the homeowner. And that was fixed by law in in Colorado, but it does need to be fixed everywhere. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, I mean, Jennifer she kind of summarized it well, but we found people that were struggling to pay for contractors or vendors or just various things that were going on because the insurance had paid the mortgage company, but they didn't release the funds to the person. And this was happening kind of in silos and as back to Raina's point, when you have community meetings and people can raise these issues, then someone goes, I'm also dealing with that. I'm also dealing with that. And that's where the power comes to push against legislators at the local, county, state levels to address it quickly versus one resident fighting with somebody that they, can't get a hold of, or and so I think that's the value. It's like unionizing in this process, as a residents to have the bargaining power against forces that are, they have a lot of other things going on as well, and then the next disaster or whatever. So yeah, that's and there's going to be things that come up that we haven't even seen yet. And so as they do, and people are in community and engaging with each other, that's going to be crucial in the recovery. I initially raised my hand because I also want to speak about the mental health part of it. This one is a constant. And I think in our fire, we were able to get some funding to support people getting services, whether it was, like 10 visits or mental health, groups coming to our events, like having them at gatherings, having them in organizations and corporations, just that they're available, because it won't occur to them to take care of themselves. And so it's really important to just put it in front of people all the time. And we had some people that picked it up right away. And then we had some people at our 1 year kind of anniversary mark that they just broke, and they hadn't addressed any mental health the whole year. They were just reacting. And so I think that is a key piece of it that has to overlay everything. And there's going to be funding for various ways to do that. It could be art therapy. It could be, not everyone's keen on going to a therapist and getting, help like that. But this is, for most people, this will be an unprecedented experience in their life, and they don't have the skill set to manage it. So I think just keeping that mental health piece top of mind, it's so important, because in a normal brain, Raina's talking about fire brain, like in your normal brain, you're like, okay, I have these 50 tasks I need to do, and I can, manage this. But when you have fire brain, you're not going to respond to anything in the way that you normally would, and you forget things, and you need to hear things 3 or 4 times before you'll be like, oh, I just heard that, even though it has been said several times before. People can let it in when they're ready, and everyone's going to be on a different timeline. And so, just supporting the caring for each other. I think at my 1 year mark, I realized I'm a big cyclist, and I was like, I haven't ridden my bike once this year. And that seems petty and small in the big picture of the world and all the disaster that we were dealing with, but it was everything that I needed to just feel capable of continuing another day and managing this. And so it was like a reminder. And I started telling everyone, like, what's the thing that you love? Don't stop doing it. Like, find a place to do it. Find one moment, even if it's once a week, to just take care of yourself, because everyone's going to forget, because this is an massive task undertaking, and they can't forget. Like, they have to, you have to hold each other accountable to take care of yourselves.
Well, one of the things
we've connected them with Dr. Hines, Adrienne Hines, and so they're going to have a whole other program with her. She's wonderful. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Sorry. Yeah. One of the things that I would love to just understand, it's been really inspiring to see how many emergent leaders there are in these communities. You mentioned block captains as well. I guess maybe to tie it all together, could you just help us understand, like, what are the community organized efforts or jobs to be done or whatever that are most useful? Because I think so many people want to come forward and help and provide that, I don't know, whether it's project management, whatever it is that's helpful for community organizing, but like, what sort of jobs are most useful to folks who are, of course, trying to care for their families and get to work and also rebuild their community, their homes, et cetera? Like, what jobs can the broader community help do to support folks who've been impacted?
I think we're probably all going to want to weigh in on this one, because you get so many offers of help and you can't take it at the time, or people want to offer you a couch the day after, and you're like, I don't have any place to put it. And sometimes what you have to say to people who are offering all that help is, I don't know right now, but would you mind? I might have to call you in 6 months. And could you help me then too? Because this is a very long recovery, and the skill set they have may not be as relevant right now, or it's just too much to organize. That's why one of the reasons why the community groups are so good, because they can also invite those people in for technical advice and to help them walk through it. Grant writers, there are just so many different areas that have to be attended to. Again, this is the biggest group project of your entire life. This is why no one person, not even no 100 people can do this. So that is a very big deal. Emergent leaders, though, are, I always say, the secret sauce of recovery. We are all in some way emergent leaders. We did not design these careers or this volunteer work or anything else that we're doing. It came to us. But we also tend to be people with high social capital who are trusted by the community. And that builds even more trust between the community, because those emerge as the natural leaders. It's often not your elected leaders unless you have an exceptional one. We do have one in Sonoma County named James Gore. But we also had some less than exceptional leaders who really held back recovery. So that was one of the things I'm going to say is you can tell people, can I hold on to that, build a database for it? They really want to help now, but do they want to help, or can they help in 6 months? Because this is a very long process. Let's go to Raina next, and then we're going to do the whole run because it's such a good question.
Yeah, I love this question so much. So I'll just describe the early part of our board. We had somebody handling media and press, who was like our storyteller. We had somebody who was dealing with bringing our community into our community, our virtual community. We had somebody who was championing sort of like the administrative part of our organization and getting us 501c3 status, which took a little bit of time. And we also had like a fundraising mini team, and then folks who are dealing with figuring out events. And, there's a lot of different pieces to the puzzle. And I think you can do a lot of different things based on what people's skill sets are, but finding where places to plug people in is really vital. I think one of the biggest things too about our community is that we did a lot of listening to what people needed. And so like bringing those people together can make a really big difference. We had another community group, Meryl, who's not here, but she basically did the how do I get 5,000 couches to a bunch of people? That was a huge task of hers. And she basically verified every fire family to make sure that we were legit. And whenever a corporate sponsor came in and wanted to distribute something, they would go through her, and her amazing team would distribute them, including food, couches, bicycles, plants, all of the above, right? Like the things that people needed and wanted in different staggered intervals.
Okay. Valerie Brown, go ahead. Why don't you go next?
Yeah, I will say when my disaster hit, I was just a PTA mom, cookie coordinator, overqualified, and just doing stuff just like Raina. And I got thrust into this collaborative space, and that's part of what you end up doing is what Raina's team did is you do that collaboration and coordination. You see who's got what skill set. They may just be part of your community group. They may be better suited for a volunteer partner, and LA Works has that piece on their site where you can connect people, but it really is just mixing it up and finding where you can do the most impact.
I like that. Mike?
Thank you. I would say from my experience, one of the most important things to continue is the outreach component. So staying on your public officials to keep that consistent outreach going. That was a big failure in Santa Cruz County. I think we did a total of 3 outreach meetings where we were sharing information with the public, and it fell so short. Maui is still, we're still doing a weekly outreach meeting, and it's so important. I think even if sometimes it's the same folks coming and maybe there's not a whole bunch of new information, but it's the community and the emotional need. So I would peak on that. Really push on your elected officials, and your public officials to say, let's not disregard the last 8-9 years of history and start learning on the fly. Let's take that experience and not hit the same pothole. That's what I would.
I love that. We're actually bringing the mayor, Mayor Bisson, from Maui on our delegation at the end of the month. And I think he's a great leader through this. I really think he's underestimated in the beginning, but I'm going to tell you, he's a wonderful human being. So, and Jen?
I don't think I could come up with anything new outside of what they've said, but I will add that there is some endurance to the process. So people who started with, let's say, a newsletter or, organizing the events, there was literal burnout after some time. These are volunteer positions. And so just be conscious of whether they need space or there's a backup needed or there's a handoff needed, because if the endurance needs to be there for these things, they're a heavy lift.
There's two things that can be really helped by outside people who are are class action attorneys but don't have an interest in actually trying to scoop up clients. You are being inundated there. They always come. They always just absolutely flood the zone. And the fire is not even over, and they're trying to scoop up clients. People don't know yet if they need an attorney. There's no need to get an attorney right now. And if you say that there's no settlement, don't need an attorney. But say there's a global settlement like there is on Maui, where you also don't need an attorney, those people who signed up early are now obligated to pay that percentage to the attorney that they actually didn't have to pay. We also saw that in our fires as a structured fire victims trust. PG&E did that because they went bankrupt, so they combined us with the Camp Fire. And, a lot of people were able to do it with a paralegal or on their own. Even I'm saying that there are times when you do need an attorney, and they're a great idea, but don't try to jump ahead with that. So really educating people, have an attorney do it. I'm not an attorney. And the other thing is sometimes you need help with neighbors who have empty homes that nobody lives in. We all live in communities where that's true, and they tend to drag the process because they're not there. They don't have the same sense of immediacy, and they can actually slow down all of your debris removal because they want to go block by block by not filling out the right of entry form. And that's just a very common thing that we see over and over again. And so really to help, if somebody can help you figure out who all those people are and how to contact them, that's a really helpful thing too, a technical thing in the beginning.
So I know we're now running over, but I think maybe to end on one sort of big question for all of you, which is one of the things that seems very clear, and these are Altadena, the Palisades, Malibu, these are historic communities in LA where homes, schools, places of worship have all been really heavily impacted. One of the things that seems clear to me just in the few, in I guess the week since, is that these communities are going to change, right? There are people who won't be able to rebuild. There are folks who are maybe elderly and don't want to rebuild at this phase in their life. And there are, I think, visions for what the community can become while, still really staying true to what the community wants. How can we best support, these communities in dreaming about their future, envisioning their future together? And how can we make sure that the folks in the community themselves sort of remain in control of the direction of travel there? Because I think one of the things I've heard from a lot of residents, is sort of this feeling of not wanting something thrust upon them, but rather being able to, together with their neighbors, figure out the path forward. So like, how has that worked in your communities, and how have you seen that in the past? And what's the best way to, help these communities figure out the path forward together and navigating the change that's ahead?
I will say that in every community, the answer to that is slightly different. But in Sonoma County, we rebuilt pretty much completely, like maybe 92% in 5 years. And we had 5,900 homes lost. But we did largely rebuild back sort of the not different from how we burned down. And we were not aware that all of this was going to come after. Even when we were in the middle of it, we just weren't aware of it. And one of the things you and I talked about on Sunday is there has to be a huge curiosity from people, like what is out there so that they can rebuild back in a way that is also insurable and where they can endure a megafire. Because the houses become the next form of ignition. This is certainly true in the Marshall fire, but it's always true. And it's venting, it's gutter guards. It's just, there are some simple things you can do. But to think about not only how are they going to rebuild, but do it in a way that is multi-peril climate resilient. There's a lot of research out there. There's a lot of products out there. There's a lot of stuff that's scaled already. It's not even experimental. It's like I talked to you about Icon Build or nanotech materials. They have polymers you can put in your house paint that can stop it from burning. There are simple things. I also got a note from Congressman Thompson today. He's introducing a bill to give like $10,000 per home in the rebuild just for the simple measures. And I think it's a 30% tax credit in addition to that, if people choose these more resilient methods. The other thing is that in a neighborhood, you're not going, if you all don't do it, your insurance is not going to support just the 2 homes out of 30 that chose to do it that way. That is, resiliency is also a group project, and Paradise is seeing a huge reduction in their cost of insuring their homes because they have taken all of these measures and they can be beautiful. I see that Craig has raised his hand.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that. Get involved in your city council meetings. Go to those meetings. See what they're going to be doing with your community. You do have a voice. You want to have your voice heard for how they're going to rebuild your community and what it's going to look like, especially on the planning end. A lot of the work we do is in that community development aspect, in the planning work, in the building work. I think what you're probably alluding to is it going to look like it used to look? In Paradise, it did not. In other places,
Yeah.
In Maui, a lot of aspects it will. You have to have your voice heard. You have to get to those council meetings and be there and be a presence and see how they're going to do it, or else they'll do it without you.
And now Jen, she became one of them, so I love that. But Raina raised her hand. There is a company that's called Legislative AI. And they are active in California. I was a high school teacher for a decade, and so he was one of my former students. He's also in Hawaii, and it actually feeds you any city council, county, anything, the agenda. So you do not have to go and do a deep dive in each of those companies, and we can send you the link for that too. It's just one way to streamline it and make it easy. It's probably about 3 years old, the company, and so he's already tested it in Hawaii, where he's now based. But Raina, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing, Evan, you said at the very beginning of your question was like the historical community piece. And being from Southern California, I know, that vibe is very important, and like the historical context is really important. I think Lahaina, we had these conversations with Lahaina when we went out for the delegation. That sort of integrity and keeping the spirit of the community is going to be part of the process. And, I know Jennifer and Craig just talked about sort of the technical ends, like go to the council meetings. But I think the community members raising their voice and saying, this is actually really important to us early and often are going to be crucial in making sure that it actually looks and feels like the community wants to, see it down the line. I think if you're going to see houses pop up that don't look like what it was before, that's true of our community, but I think some of us actually really like that. And I think that, the spirit of your community is going to be something that you all as a community have to continue to talk about and protect. And I think it could still be more resilient, right? Like it needs to be more resilient. So while it still looks and feels the way that you want it to.
One more reason the block captain thing is really important, because you would have a collective voice in asking for how do you rebuild back with the character and resiliency that you had. The community you had before, unfortunately, is gone. But it doesn't mean that you can't or shouldn't reimagine what comes next. And it should be like, well, I tell communities, start with your perfect case scenario, which isn't the day before, because we can't do that. But start there and then reverse engineer for what you want. And, dream big right now. It's like that. It's the time to do that. Valerie, I see you raised your hand.
Yeah, just to throw out, facilitating those conversations as a community, be it at the HOA level, the neighborhood level, the city level. It's important because for disaster survivors, whether they're doing repairs or rebuilding, they're leaning into getting that done. And it is just shattering to have your HOA, your city, your neighborhood say, what are you doing? And kind of smack people verbally. It's not helpful. So having those conversations, having that space, be it a monthly, like Lahaina, that monthly, actually that's weekly, right?
Weekly.
Still weekly. Yeah. Having a weekly, monthly, be a faith partner, community center. We always did, we did a meal once a month, and we were really breaking bread with those people doing the work, those people who were informing the decision, and those people that were impacted directly, so that we were all on the same page. And having that space really will eliminate a lot of those problems that you see when people make decisions in a vacuum that are going to impact people who are in a world of hurt and their neighbors who don't really know what's going on, and they're very hesitant to say anything because they don't want to be viewed as, not being appreciative of where someone is. There's just a lot of expectations to unpack, and having space.
Can I mention something else? Oh, Jen, go ahead.
I think we have to be a little mindful of time because I have to queue up Jen Couch so that we can actually finish this. But Jen has the best story on this. I'm sorry, Raina, I have to give this one to her.
Are you talking about the HOA
Yeah.
fencing? Oh, yeah. Well, I was going to note that, in communities where there's an HOA or a planned development, a PD for what the neighborhood looks like, you're going to have to follow that or have it amended through the public policy process. And so, those communities should figure out, they'll know who they are. But in our community, we have a large HOA that lost a lot of homes, and we had cedar fences between the homes. And we know that they were igniters. Is a dark humor, but in our meeting, some of the neighbor would be like, "Hi, I'm Bob, and this is my neighbor Eric. I burned his house down with my fence." It's like they couldn't be removed from the part that we watched them videos of the wooden fences lighting, down the row. And when it was time to rebuild, the HOA was requiring them to put cedar fences back into their homes as they rebuilt in the process. And we got the media involved and the community involved and basically just mutinied on this HOA until they finally were willing to adjust. But it was one of those things where if people weren't talking to each other and didn't know that each isolated person was dealing with this, that, we wouldn't have been able to fight. I remember after the fire came to our community and they talked, I'm hearing us, we keep telling, the advice is the community and the gathering and people together. And I remember when they came, I was like, just tell me what to do. I don't want to hang out with people. I want, how do I fix this problem? Yeah. And I didn't understand, until some time had gone by, how impactful this, kind of collective would be. And that it really is the answer to most of the problems that you're going to face. But I did want to also say, you don't have to go to city council meetings. You can email the board, you can call and leave messages, because sometimes people are like, please don't make me go to another meeting. I don't have time for this. I can't watch this, but you can view them after the fact. You can see the agendas beforehand, and the board and the staff will read and listen to all of those messaging. So just know that you don't physically have to go to those meetings to make sure that your opinion's heard at those as well.
Raina, did you want to add one last thing before we finish up?
Sure. I just put it in the chat, but we're sort of off topic now from that. I just wanted to say that the Community Foundation might be able to provide a grant for something like facilitating a lot of these bigger conversations. Like a visioning conversation is extremely complicated. It's not just like one person listening to another person. It's really having a conversation with the community. And so it takes a facilitation process, and the Community Foundation being what it is right now, and being the primary source of funds to your community, I think it could be a good place to create that relationship.
Awesome. Well, Jennifer, Mike, Raina, Valerie, Jen, Craig, thank you so much. I mean, this has been so helpful. We didn't get to half the questions, unfortunately, because folks have just got so many questions here, but hopefully we can address them at a further date. And we're just so grateful for all the work you're doing, here in Los Angeles and around the US. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Thank you.